Walter arrives at the basement of a Chinese restaurant, where he needs to tame an angry dog. He starts telling a story to distract the animal, and eventually manages to lure him in. Walter then checks the dog tag and finds out that his name is Ned, which shocks him for some reason, right before Ned bites him before fleeing the basement. And so, an injured Walter also follows with a tranquilizer. Not long after, he follows Ned to a cemetery, but the dog vanishes before he can be apprehended. Walter's eyes are then drawn to the gravestone of a certain woman named Laura Tollins. Elsewhere, we see Walter's wife, Agatha, who is waiting for him with a cake for the celebration. But he's taking too long to show up, so she wanders into a bookstore, where a book called The Number 23 catches her eye. Shortly after, Walter arrives at the bookstore and finds his wife reading the book. Ned is seen silently watching him, and Walter tells Agatha about what happened. She then gives him the same book as a birthday gift, and Walter learns that it is written by a mysterious author named Topsy Kretz. Afterward, the couple attends a party with their friends, but a curious Walter can't resist reading the book. The prologue warns that the characters are fictional, but if the reader notices any similarity to real life, they should stop reading immediately. Upon returning home, Walter's teenage son, Robin, wishes him a happy birthday and gives him a gift. Walter then opens chapter 1 of the book and discovers that the main character is known as Fingerling. The next day, on February 4th, Walter is given a day off because of his biting encounter with Ned, so he stays home and begins reading the book from chapter 2. The book instructs the reader to imagine themselves as the child, making the experience immersive. The story follows a boy who lives in a remote town, and he's intensely studious, knowing that education is the only way he can escape this place. It turns out Fingerling is very friendly with a neighbor, Widow Dobkin's dog, who always runs toward their house. The boy always chases the dog back home, but his father has a strict rule forbidding him from crossing the neighbor's yard. However, on his 8th birthday, Fingerling breaks the rule and follows the dog home, where he's horrified to discover Widow Dobkins bloodied and dead in her bedroom. Even though the authorities eventually rule it's self-inflicted, Fingerling realizes it was done by a deranged man, which eventually inspires him to become a detective. After finishing chapter 2, Walter tells Agatha that he and Fingerling have many things in common, and it seems like the book is based on his memories. He shows her a photo album of his neighbor's dog, who used to run away, and inspired him to work in animal control. He also reveals how Widow Dobkins reminds him of his mom, who died when he was 8. But Agatha doesn't think Fingerling is like him, and simply asks him to keep reading to find out. Walter then continues reading, and learns that Fingerling eventually becomes a detective, and meets a woman named Fabrizia. The next day, on February 5th, Walter is at work, but he spends his time reading the book and is already on chapter 5. In this part, Detective Fingerling encounters a blonde woman who is about to end her life by hanging. He somehow manages to charm her, and the girl eventually agrees to change her mind. She then reveals that it's all because of the number 23, and rips down posters from the walls. She shares that her father, who had taken his own life after his wife died, had passed the curse on to her. The number haunted her everywhere. It appeared in dates, times, pages of books, even in her name, on license plates, and in colors. Upon hearing this, Fingerling is confused, so he begins telling a story to the blonde girl to distract her. She laughs at his story, and he proceeds to leave, believing he has persuaded her not to unalive herself. But as he walks down the alley, the blonde girl tragically collapses before him and loses her life. Upon reading all this, Walter is stunned, and soon he notices that his initial, W, is also the 23rd letter. Walter thus goes to the store to learn more about the author, but discovers that it is self-published, and that the mysterious author hasn't written anything other than this book. Upon returning home, Walter shares with his family how, if he adds all the letters in his name, it results in 23. Furthermore, his birthday is on February 23rd. He was born at 11/12, which adds up to 23, and even his social security number and license contain 23. He's convinced the author wrote the book about him, but Agatha remains skeptical. She reveals how Fingerling eventually becomes a killer, and asks Walter if he is a killer as well. Next, Walter reads chapter 7, where Fingerling also begins seeing the number 23 everywhere. he goes to the hotel with Fabrizia, where he notices the time is 9:14, which adds up to 23. They proceed to a room, where she requests that he threaten to kill her as a role play. He plays along, but insists that he loves her deeply and would never hurt her in real life. Regardless, ever since that day, he begins having terrible nightmares about murdering Fabrizia. Meanwhile, in the real world, Walter also begins to have hallucinations of himself stabbing someone, which deeply disturbs him. When he goes to put down the book, he counts his wife's shoes and realizes that there are 23 pairs in total. The next day, on February 6th, Agatha wakes up and finds Walter sleeping on the couch. She notices several calculations resulting in the number 23 on his arm, along with a message saying, "Kill her." Worried, she immediately calls her friend, Dr. Isaac, for help. In the next scene, Walter arrives at a university to meet Dr. Isaac, who is a professor. Walter asks the man for help, and Isaac speculates that it could be the result of conspiracy theories. He states that the Earth's axis of rotation is 23.5 degrees, which is rounded to 23, and 5 is the sum of 2 and 3. He also mentions that there are 23 axioms in geometry, 23 pairs of chromosomes in the human body, and blood takes 23 seconds to circulate. In the Bible, the Apocalypse has 22 chapters, because 23 is considered a cursed number. Even during this conversation, Walter continues seeing the number everywhere, and he reveals that Agatha thinks he's going nuts. But Isaac urges him to finish the book first, and if he still believes it's about him, then only the author can give him the right answer. Next, Walter continues reading the book, and learns that Fingerling goes to visit his psychiatrist, Dr. Phoenix, because of his nightmares about murdering his girlfriend. The doctor assures him that time will fix everything, and suggests that he take a break from work for a while. Upon returning home, Fabrizia isn't impressed that Walter took a break from work, and she proceeds to leave. Afterward, Fingerling notices that Fabrizia has 23 pairs of shoes, so he angrily throws one pair away. Later, when Fabrizia finds out about this, she gets mad and calls him insane. But the deranged man continues talking about important events in history, including Ted Bundy's execution on the 23rd of January. He explains how they are all related to the number 23, which annoys her. Days later, Fingerling tells all of that to Dr. Phoenix, who looks at Fabrizia's picture and offers to talk to her. The detective agrees, but this soon proves to be a huge mistake, as the doctor and Fabrizia quickly begin an affair. Upon reading this, Walter recalls Dr. Isaac, and worries he'll also have an affair with his wife. He thus sets out to find her, and notices the number 23 everywhere along the way. Walter soon reaches his wife's store, which is closed, but he's stunned to find her chatting with none other than Isaac inside. Later that night, Walter wakes up at 11:12 from a nightmare, and suddenly leaves the house. He has no idea why he chooses to stay at a hotel called King Edward, and he then asks for room 23. Walter then continues reading, and is on chapter 22, when Dr. Phoenix arrives to see Fabrizia, and is horrified to find her bloodied and dead. Fingerling is seen hiding nearby, and it turns out that he murdered his girlfriend in a fit of rage. But the police discover Dr. Phoenix with a bloodied knife, and immediately arrest him for murder. Later on, Fingerling stands at the window, about to jump, but before Walter can find out what happens, the book ends, and there's nothing more after chapter 22. At this moment, he hears the sound of a dog barking outside, and it turns out to be Ned. Walter now starts chasing him, and the dog leads him to the cemetery once again. Here, Walter puts him to sleep with a tranquilizer, and realizes that adding all the letters in Ned's name together also equals 23. At this moment, a priest arrives with his gardener, who turns out to be Ned's owner. Walter explains that he just put the dog to sleep, and the priest tells him that Ned has a strange habit of watching over graves. When Walter looks at the tombstone, he realizes it belongs to a girl named Laura Tollins, who died on her 23rd birthday. The priest then reveals that they don't know if she's even dead, as her body was never found. Upon returning home, Walter again finds Dr. Isaac there, and he tells everyone that this isn't just a book, it's a chilling confession to a murder. He shows them newspaper clippings about Laura Tollins' death almost 15 years ago, and reveals that her lover and professor, Kyle, was arrested for her murder. The circumstances of Laura's death are almost the same as those of Fabrizia's murder, leading Walter to suspect it was Kyle who wrote the book. The next day, on February 8th, Walter arrives at a prison to meet Kyle and asks him about the number 23. He also asks if Kyle wrote the book as a confession while using the fake name, Topsy-Kretz. But Kyle insists that he didn't kill Laura and that he's in prison for something he didn't do. He also states that if he had written a book, he would never have used such a silly pseudonym as Topsy-Kretz, which sounds like top secrets. Next, Walter exits the prison and tells his family he doesn't think Kyle could have committed the crime. Robin then reveals that he was reading the book last night and found the author's mailbox address on a hidden sheet of paper. The family thus decides to send 23 packages filled with foam to that address. The next day, on February 9th, the family arrives at the delivery office and waits to see who will pick up the packages. Shortly after, an old man wearing a hat comes in, and the family thinks this must be the author. Later, while the old man is opening the package, Walter confronts him about the book, but the man is stunned to see him and tells Walter that he should be dead. He lunges briefly at Walter before running away, but Walter manages to catch up and asks him what the number 23 means. The old man simply says he already knows that, before surprisingly slitting his own throat, shocking everyone. Agatha rushes to help him and frantically tells Walter to leave with her son. As the man is dying, he gives Agatha an address to visit, and she also finds his card in his pocket. In the evening, Agatha calls Walter to let him know the old man died, and she couldn't find any info about him. It turns out she's at the address given by the old man, which turns out to be an abandoned psychiatric institution. She learns that his name was Dr. Leary, who probably used to work there. Agatha now enters the institute and soon finds Dr. Leary's office, which she enters. Meanwhile, at home, Walter discovers that every 23rd word on the 23rd page in the book gives him a text. It says, "Visit Casanova's Park and dig beneath the steps to heaven," so Walter decides to head there with his son. At the same time, Agatha arrives at a creepy red room, where she's horrified to find the walls filled with the number 23 all over, and a box with Walter Sparrow's name on the floor. Suddenly, she's startled by someone. Elsewhere, the father and son arrive at the park and, after taking 23 steps, Walter begins digging. Here, the duo is horrified when they uncover someone's skull, and they immediately run to the nearest payphone to call the cops. But then, when the cops arrive, the skull has vanished, so they accuse the father and son of playing a twisted prank. After asking several questions, the police leave, just as Agatha arrives with Dr. Isaac to pick up her family. And then, while heading home, they come across Ned, who is eerily sitting in the middle of the road. Walter accuses him of causing everything, and drives his vehicle straight toward the animal, but he can't bring himself to do so. He then notices Agatha's hands, caked in mud, and shockingly realizes that she was the one who stole the bones. And so, Walter accuses her of being the killer and the author of the book. He checks her bag and finds a knife in there, which only deepens his suspicions. At this moment, Robin arrives and demands to know what's happening, so Walter reveals how his mom is a killer. Agatha now finally admits that she and Isaac did steal the bones, but it was just to protect the family. In a shocking twist, she informs Walter that it was he who wrote the book, and not her. She then shows him the original manuscript she found from the psychiatric institution with his name on it, but Walter refuses to believe this. At this point, Isaac also joins them, and Walter accuses the two of orchestrating everything. But Agatha shows Walter a saxophone, the instrument Fingerling played in the book, which evokes a memory in Walter. He frantically rummages through the box of old belongings and uncovers several items that gradually pieces memories back together. He's overwhelmed by the weight of everything and bolts from the house, followed by the rest of the family. Not long after, Walter returns to the King Edward Hotel at room number 23, where he has a vision of his past. He begins tearing the wallpaper from the walls, and is soon shocked to see chapter 23 written beneath it. In this chapter, Fingerling finally introduces himself with his real name, which is none other than Walter. He continues by narrating how, after his mom died, his father couldn't cope and ended his own life. He didn't even leave a note, and the only thing left behind was the number 23. The number haunts Walter all his life, and follows him into college, where he meets Laura Tollins. The two soon start dating, and Walter becomes deeply obsessed and in love with her. However, Walter's world comes crashing down one day when he discovers she's been having an affair with her professor, Kyle. When he arrives at her house, she has left his belongings outside along with a brutal breakup note. The deranged Walter obsessively counts every 23rd word in the note and figures out one message: kill her. Next, Walter goes to warn her that they should escape because the number is after her now. But she refuses to believe his nonsense and begins provoking him with a knife. She says that she never loved him and even calls him a weak, pathetic man like his dad. This sends Walter into a blind rage, and he brutally stabs her multiple times until she is dead. After this, a distraught Walter hides her body in the park, which is shockingly noticed by none other than Ned. Afterward, Kyle arrives to meet Laura and is horrified to find the bed drenched in blood. He accidentally touches the knife, smearing it with his fingerprints and staining his hands with blood, causing the guy to be convicted of the murder. Elsewhere, Walter goes to the King Edward Hotel and rents room number 23, where he begins writing the book as a confession, before he intends to end his life. He eventually writes chapter 23 on the walls, the floor, and every other part of the room. The hopeless man then jumps off the balcony, but he survives with severe injuries and trauma. Following this, Walter is taken to a psychiatric institution because he can't remember anything. All his notes are dismissed as nothing more than fiction, and they fall into the hands of Dr. Leary, who works there. Walter then receives treatment and eventually recovers, though he has no memory of Laura. When he leaves the institute, he meets Agatha, and the two fall in love with each other. In the meantime, Dr. Leary reads the manuscript and publishes the book, but he also becomes obsessed with the number 23 and gradually descends into insanity. In the present, Walter is reviewing his past in the same hotel room when Agatha approaches him. He feels horrible that he killed someone and let an innocent person go to jail. But she reassures him that he is a good person and an ideal husband and father. Regardless, a remorseful Walter goes out into the road and notices Ned outside. He decides to end his life, but at the last moment, he changes his mind when he sees his son. He realizes he doesn't want Robin to suffer the same trauma he endured after watching his father die. The family hugs each other through tears, and Walter finally realizes that 23 is just a number. Sometime later, we see a funeral procession of Laura Tullin's bones, where the now free Kyle and Ned are also present. It turns out that Walter has turned himself in, and is currently waiting for his parole at the jail. He is optimistic that having confessed will result in a lesser sentence, but what truly matters to him is that he did the right thing. The movie ends with Agatha and Robin visiting him in prison, while Walter stares at the clock, which is shockingly pointing at 23.